This is Brian Hanson, co-writer and director of The Black String, and you are listening to The Movie Raid.
It's time for the movie raid, and tonight's victim is director Brian Hanson of The Black String. Hello.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me on.
What have we been up to lately?
The Black String was released through Grindstone Lionsgate a few months ago, so Richard Hanley, my producing partner, and I had got more free time on our hands, and I actually, outside of The Black String, just finished up 6 months on an HBO show, a reboot of Perry Mason. I was the assistant to the star of the show, Matthew Rhys. You might be familiar with him in The Americans, the FX show The Americans, and he was just in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood starring with Tom Hanks. So I just got to really see how HBO produces gigantic shows and how an A-list actor does his job. It was a fantastic experience.
Now, have you overcome different challenges with going into television, or have you experienced anything different from it?
I have. I worked on HBO. I worked as a kind of like military veteran trainee. I was in the Army, and they have this great program where they help veterans out. I worked as a production assistant on Barry Season 1. I also worked on Silicon Valley and the HBO show Room 104. So I have a lot of experience on the production side of television. My goal is to write and direct TV, so I got to find a way to make that transition. But it has been outstanding to see, as an independent filmmaker who you got to do a lot with a little small team, small budget, see how HBO spends millions and millions of dollars and works with a gigantic team. That's a skill set too, and able to see how the pros, the big dogs do it. My goal is to transition as an independent filmmaker, find a way to get on that HBO level. So it's going to take a few years, but I'm happy to even have the opportunity to be on those sets, and I'll connect the dots soon.
As a director, when it comes with The Black String, do you think there's so many factors involved in terms of what you can get out of this film, however the viewer sees it? Do you think being coherent with oneself can actually be a little bit of a message too, not just to the world themselves, but actually to themselves, to be more aware?
The intention with The Black String is we love those movies like Jacob's Ladder and The Black Swan. Even more fun, kind of like Phantasm. Is this happening? What you're seeing, is this real? Obviously, Rosemary's Baby. And playing with the idea of, what's real to one person, not real to somebody else. We really did want to challenge, like, if you were a clear, logical person and the craziest thing started to happen to you, how could you convince this? How could you convince other people that this is happening? So being clear and cohesive, we wanted to put our character, Jonathan, played by Frankie Muniz, and how do you explain that you've been cursed by a coven of witches to doctors and family members? They will never believe you. That's what we wanted to explore there, is how do you communicate something like that? And maybe you can't. Maybe you're the only one that is ever going to believe that. And that's a personal hell. No one else will believe you.
And the fact is that people actually take a little bit from this, from the actual movie, like having to take certain emotion from the character itself. Like, some of these people are feeling the same way. Some of these are maybe not feeling exactly what's in the movie, of course, but having to take a little bit of this and kind of like a reality of their own, and as far as being coherent, having to realize this is what they are really going through, and then the fact is, should they get help? Should they do something else with this kind of emotion? That's where it really goes down to.
Exactly, and you kind of, a bit of, the original sort of motivation, again, is this character, Jonathan, who appears very logical and sound. He's a sound mind, smart guy, and he's experiencing something that is so illogical. And we see this in Los Angeles, because there's so many homeless now, the epidemic and across the country, and you'll see somebody who they're okay, but they're screaming at the sky, and they're really kind of out of their mind. And we wanted to explore, how did that person get there? And at what point did they know, maybe I'm having problems, maybe I should do something about this, whether it's mental illness or drug addiction, or maybe dipping into the supernatural. Just like when we all look at WebMD with a headache, at what point is this just a headache that'll pass, or maybe I have a tumor that I should go to the doctor? There's that decision point. Should I seek help, or am I going to be okay? I think it's an interesting moment that people face every single day in their life. Obviously, for The Black String, we took that to the extreme, and you see it when Frankie Muniz, playing Jonathan, I need to go get help, but unfortunately, kind of the medical community won't help him. What we wanted to challenge ourselves with Rich, Andy, and I, when we wrote the story, was what would, again, a logical person, what steps would they go through? Okay, maybe they got poisoned, or maybe this is a sexually transmitted disease, or maybe I could just put some cream on it. Maybe I could talk to my parents about it. He really tries to go logically solve this problem, and unfortunately nobody will believe him, and he just has to keep going further and further, eventually into maybe there's supernatural metaphysical things going on. And once he crosses that line, there's no way that a medical community, let alone your parents, are going to believe you, and that's his challenge.
Do you think with this formula of this film, mixing illogical with logical, do you think this was easier with selling this to the other media platforms in terms of getting the movie out there, or do you think it was much harder for the audience to fully kind of understand this kind of concept?
I think that we are in a family of movies that are psychological thriller, psychological horror. At times, again, Rich, Andy, and I thought we were out on this limb. But again, you remember Rosemary's Baby, Jacob's Ladder, Black Swan, Shutter Island. You know, there's so many movies that play with the, is this real or is this not real? That we were like, okay, we're part of there's a lineage of movies like this. We're actually much more grounded than sometimes we felt, but it's in the execution. You're a challenge to do this the right way so that audiences can follow it. And I feel that with the reception that we've received through getting selected from fantastic film festivals and then landing distribution through Grindstone, Lionsgate, people connected with it. Absolutely. It's not a straight-up horror movie with a guy with a mask and an axe chasing girls through the woods. It's a little more thoughtful and ambiguous, but we still were within the realm of, like, acceptability in most audiences. We worked hard to be kind of commercially viable, and I think we stayed just barely within those confines.
A lot of these films who have this kind of concept are not really pushed hard enough to show the audience that there's so many different capabilities, so many different visions to play with these type of films, and it seems like it's like almost its own subtle genre that no one's really going to fully explore, because it's kind of like buried underneath all the other more straightforward hardcore horror and all other type of subgenres.
For sure, totally agree with you. It's a tougher sell, but it is a subgenre within horror that exists, and it was a really popular movie that came out. We played in festivals called Daniel Isn't Real. We played in Hitchis and Fright Fest with them. It's a big budget movie of all the VFX and really cool visuals that kind of pump up the is it real or is it not visualization on the screen. We were much more low-key. We were a far lower budget film. But why we work, ultimately, I'd like to think that we put a good script together and everyone on the crew did a fantastic job. But Frankie Muniz as Jonathan, this movie's told through his perspective. Frankie had to sell it. He had to own it. And I think he did 100%. Such an amazing performance. And when he believes what he's going through, you do too as an audience. We do. As a director and an editor, I believed it. I think that's kind of what could be a little complicated to sell. Frankie nailed it. And so did the supporting cast who played off of Frankie. They made it real. They made it real, and you felt his struggle, but you could also see why other people in his life, other characters, didn't believe him. Big kudos to our cast.
It's so tricky, the fact that when you implicate all these elements into one film, and it can be a mess too, because if you lose that audience to a degree, and they're not trying to figure out what's going on anymore, this film is never going to get anywhere. It's just going to be one of those awkward type films, and awkward in this kind of subtext is really not good for you, because if you're not implicating these kind of elements and giving some kind of a bread trail, so to speak, they're not going to try to put at least one clue together and not have any kind of real fun with it.
You're 100% correct, and we worked hard on the script because we knew that it is very easy to lose people where they just don't care anymore. We worked hard to build a breadcrumb trail, as you said. You know, there's some elements in the script. Again, we wanted people to walk out of this movie and debate. A boyfriend, girlfriend, a husband, wife, two buddies, whoever could go watch this movie. And we wanted them both to walk out with perhaps different opinions. And they would debate it on the way. That was our goal. We wanted it to be a debatable movie. That being said, you'll have to have the breadcrumb trail to even build the debate. I think we did that. You know, not everyone wants to do that work in a movie, and we understand it. It's not going to be for everybody. But we wanted to make a movie that we liked, the kind of movie we would want to rent. And we love those debatable films. We did do things that people would be familiar with. You know, there's the psychic that kind of can explain things at a certain point, and we have the occult book that has imagery that is familiar to people that are familiar with demonology or kind of like Aleister Crowley or H.P. Lovecraft. We infuse those things in there, and that's our breadcrumb trail, as you said. We wanted this to be a a movie that's like a double-sided coin, and you flip it in the air, and different people are going to feel that it landed like, no, it was heads, no, it was tails. It's heads or it's tails. We did is we designed the script to kind of like choose the three scenes, a little sequence would be, this is reality, right? We would really push the argument, this is reality. And then, in a binary fashion, then the next three scenes put forth the argument, no, this is like supernatural. And we just kept switching, like a coin flipping. We kept presenting the different arguments against each other. So that's how we kind of strung that together. Supernatural argument for three scenes, now, nope, this is real argument for four scenes, now supernatural argument for two scenes, now let's go back. So we really wanted people to be judging for themselves and maybe start to really pick one of those sides, like a jury watching, the defense and the prosecutor go back and forth. And then there's a lot of dualism in the script. If someone chooses to watch it a second time, you'll see things planted early that might give you a different impression of what's going on. And you see a lot of imagery that comes back slightly changed. A lot of things that are sort of said later in a different context. And we weaved all that in there so that a second screening would be enjoyable. Easter eggs is the term, there's a lot of Easter eggs in there.
Give enough information to the audience when watching films, especially like this one in particular. Do you think it's best to stay in the middle of the balance between giving enough information to the audience to understand whatever's going on in the story or the characters? Do you think it's best to stay in the middle, or do you think giving too much or too little might actually harm the audience to where the point where they might not fully understand it?
That's a very tough balance. We wanted to be kind of the judge in the court case, if you will. By what I mean that is kind of this neutral party that lets both sides make their point. We really wanted to represent the reality versus supernatural equally. We didn't want to favor one or the other. That was our choice as filmmakers. Clearly, there's times when you just 100% you're in on the supernatural side, right? Like, I think for every movie, the writer and the filmmakers need to make that decision. We wanted to be really right down the middle, but you do risk not giving anybody enough information. That's the beauty of test screenings. That's the beauty of reshoots. And that's the beauty of editing, is that when you go through that process, not to mention getting notes on the script, go through your drafts, different revisions of the script, you need to get feedback from people. So when we were going through our long post-production process, because we all had full-time jobs, we had to do this in our free time, we had a lot of test screenings. We asked questions from our audience, and if they needed more information, if 6 out of 10 people kind of had the same note, we would address that. So there's some insert shots and maybe a few pickup things we did to put more information in the movie because people needed it.
The atmosphere of the movie itself, sometimes that can be a distraction on its own, especially within this type of film. It can be a big distraction too sometimes on some of these films when it comes to applying this kind of element, a logical, illogical type of method, because if they're paying attention what's around the whole atmosphere of the film and not paying attention toward the character, okay, they're really being more distracted than more trying to focus on what's going on in the situation.
That's kind of when you get into the directing portion of it. The writing, it's on paper, it's words, but now you're sitting there with the DP, John Orphan, who shot a beautiful movie, and we're looking at the frame, and we're, Melanie, our art director, production designer, you're like, okay, what are we going to do here? We wanted to create a world that you're familiar with, and it's a little dreamy, like hopefully you feel the atmosphere, but it's familiar. We didn't want to distract too much. We wanted it to feel real. So that's the decision we made, was like, this is a real environment. This is a world we all recognize as the suburbs that most of us are familiar with, but we wanted to add a layer of like doom, like an atmosphere of doom that it gets heavier and heavier as the movie continues. But we didn't want any radical editing or lots of cutaways and close-ups and crazy things going on. We wanted it to feel a lot more real, kind of almost a cinema verite in a way, like you're just there with Jonathan experiencing it.
And the fact is that now this is released, this is out everywhere, this is where people can fully just dive into it and play with it of what this entity is. Does this change in a different effect for you as a director? Does it change you once you're entering different mediums in the film industry, television and so forth? Having this particular film, does this change a little bit of effect, or does it keep the same effect as a director to you once you're entering new projects and new realms to explore in terms of directing?
This is my first feature. This is my directorial debut. To go through this process is all a learning experience. I've done a lot of short films, but this is such a sustained effort, and then you got to edit the thing. You got to keep the production alive, going for 20 plus days, and then the editing process. Will Drucker, my editor, and I, we slaved away for like a year, more than a year, editing this thing. So yes, coming through something the first time gives you a new perspective. A lot of it is like, okay, maybe there's some good instincts and some decisions that I'm really happy that I made. Like, let's do that more. But you also, okay, I see how when we do this, I see the results. Maybe I would do it differently next time. So having at least one experience and some data to judge if this is your intention, what's the actual result and how close were you to your goal? I think we landed pretty darn close. The crew came together and just everyone went above and beyond this together for the little money that we had. With this amount of money, you can pull this off, but you also realize the limitations. So I think that I just have a much better feel of what independent filmmaking is all about and how to visualize something and then understand the amount of money you have to work with and how can you try to get close to your final vision. And sometimes, if let's say that in my next movie I want to make space opera Star Wars battle, it's not going to be an independent film. You need $100 million to do that. So it really allows you to understand scale and scope.
Would you allow yourself to be limited, or do you want to fully expand so that way you can still keep your visions out there, but even though the money is bigger and as far as budget goes and stuff like that, do you think it's best to stay limited to what you are, or do you think it's best to just go full blown and then just hopefully it goes really well in terms of the ride?
For me personally, every filmmaker is different. I want to work in the commercial space, commercial films and commercial television. There's a lot. Hey, a Black Swan's a commercial film. It's fringe commercial, but that's a commercial film. I'd like to head in that direction, thought-provoking stuff, but you do have to create a movie, that you're going to have to be working with studios and producers and people that have very real notes, and you're going to have to compromise your vision. The end goal being let's make money and entertain people. You can still push yourself towards the genre. I don't think that I'm interested in doing gigantic rom-coms. I hope to move in that direction. I think that horror is a fantastic horror, thriller, sci-fi. They're great genres. It's such a fantastic fan base, as we saw at such a fantastic fest, Film Quest. All over the country we played horror festivals. But you can do so much in a horror movie, as we've seen in movies like It Follows, The Babadook, the Black Mirror series. So many great human stories you can tell. So I like the genre. I want to keep growing within it and the fun, moody atmospheres of horror, thriller, sci-fi, but you can still tell human stories. So that's where I want to keep moving.
Go ahead and plug in any websites or anything that we can check out right now, including where can we check out The Black String?
Absolutely. Well, Amazon. You can rent it on Amazon. You can buy the DVD on Amazon. If you buy the DVD, we have some cool behind-the-scenes interviews with Frankie Muniz, deleted scenes. That's great. So just you can rent it or buy it on Amazon. $10 to buy it, $5 to rent it. It's available on any Walmart, Redbox. It's out there. Check it out. BlackStringMovie.com is our website. The Black String Movie on Instagram or Twitter. Follow us. We post some really cool behind-the-scenes photos, and we have DVD giveaways, and we're working on our next movie, so we're going to keep people posted on our next project. So Black String Movie on Instagram and Twitter. Check us out.
There you have it, everybody. That is director Brian Hanson.
Well, thanks for having me on. Love your podcast, Movie Raid. Love the horror genre, and love the fans. I'm a fan, too, so I made this movie for all of you. I hope that the work that our whole team put into it, you guys can check out The Black String and debate it with your friends the next day. That's why we wanted to make this movie, to create debate and entertain you for a couple hours.